he's like acting really weird, like he's plotting something.
She thinks she's a resurrected being and a god.
Why would I have any control over what people do?
This is 49-year-old Lori Vallow, a cult leader. She was brought in to explain why her husband was found dead at her house. But little did the cops know, this would turn into one of the most complex cases in history. Lori was a devout member of the Mormon Church and was living a happy life with her fourth husband Charles and their 3 kids. Charles regularly traveled from their home in Arizona to Texas for work, but after returning from one of these trips in January, he found his entire life had been flipped upside down.
So what's going on tonight?
I can't get in touch with my kids.
How old are your kids?
6.5 and 16. She took all the money out of her bank account today. My truck is gone from the airport. She went to the airport and got it. I just flew in from Houston.
Okay. So what makes her a danger to herself and to others?
She threatened me. Yesterday was a threat to kill me.
Okay. What did she say yesterday?
She said, "You're not Charles. I don't know who you are, what you did with Charles, but I can murder you now with my powers."
This was the first move in what would become a giant cat-and-mouse game between Lori, her family, and the police. Charles came back to find his truck missing, his bank accounts drained, and his kids nowhere to be found. Lori was also saying many bizarre things. She claimed that Charles wasn't who he says he was, that she was a resurrected being from another dimension, and that in a past life, she was married to the founder of the Mormon Church.
Is this just all recent, or has it been going on?
It's been going on for about 4 or 5 years. It's gotten really, really bad lately. She goes to the temple every day and speaks with Moroni and Jesus Christ, and they tell her what to do.
Lori soon fell in love with a man named Chad Dable, stealing everything Charles owned and running away with Chad. And after filing for divorce, things were about to get even worse for Charles, as Lori had just finished planning her next wicked move.
911, where is your emergency?
It's at 5-5. I'm in police in an ambulance. I got in a fight with my brother-in-law and I shot him in self-defense.
Months later, Lori's brother Alex shot Charles twice in the chest after he allegedly attacked him with a bat in an argument. This case should be pretty cut and dry for the cops. Charles had no history of violence, while Alex was a convicted felon on account of assault. And the only reason Charles was even there was to pick up his kids from school. However, Lori and Alex were completely confident that they'd get out of this uncharged.
What's going on? What happened?
He came at me with a bat.
Okay. Was he living here or
No.
visiting?
He came to pick up his son. No, I think they were talking earlier, then she left, and then he got into it with me.
Like what? What do you mean?
He was just yelling at me.
All of Alex's responses are extremely vague, which should instantly raise alarms with the detectives. All Alex has said so far is that they got in a fight and that it was definitely self-defense. A normal, trustworthy response would have recounted the details of the argument and the physical altercation, but Alex is struggling to even remember what he was being yelled at for.
Okay, so he showed up in the house with a bat in his hand?
No.
Okay, so...
There was a scuffle earlier with my sister and my niece. My niece got involved.
About earlier meaning earlier this week, earlier this morning?
Just this morning, before they left.
Before your wife left?
My sister.
Before your sister left?
Yeah.
So you both, so you get in an argument? What is it over?
Well, it was over my sister. He was getting physical with her, and so my niece came out with her bat, and then he took the bat away from her.
Wait a minute, I thought you said your niece left.
She did, but this is before.
Alex's story is all over the place. It's getting hard for even him to keep track of the events. But his biggest slip-up came a few minutes later, as he began to recount what he thinks happened.
I turned around, and he hit me in the back of the head with the bat. So I went to my room and got my gun.
Did you stay in your bedroom?
No.
Okay, why didn't you stay just in your bedroom, close the door? Is that something you didn't think about, or?
It didn't even occur to me.
Alex says that it didn't even cross his mind to stay in his room, which means he likely didn't think Charles posed any threat to his life. This notion alone is enough to completely discredit the self-defense claim. But somehow, it seems the detectives didn't pick up on this, the holes in his story, or the fact that he had no injuries whatsoever. It's also important to note that Alex made no attempts to resuscitate Charles and waited over 40 minutes to call an ambulance. Alex was brought in for a second round of interrogation where he delivered a second, completely different story to the one he gave at the scene.
So Charles is coming towards Lori.
He's coming towards Lori, and I shoved him back.
Okay.
I said, "What are you doing?" Because he was coming at her aggressively.
Okay.
He's a big dude, so he's not gonna hurt my sister.
Okay. So he's coming at her.
Yeah.
And you shoved him back.
Yeah.
What happened right after that?
He,
And that's in the. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
He got back up and he comes right to me, doesn't look at me, and continues to yell at Lori.
Okay.
So he's maybe this far away.
Are you in the hallway of the house, or where are you?
Right close to the doorway of that bedroom.
Of the bedroom you were staying?
Yes.
Okay.
At no point in the original discussion did Alex mention touching Charles before he shot him, putting another hole in his story that once again the cops completely miss. The cops also completely missed that Lori's story was once again completely different to either of Alex's stories.
He was hitting him with the bat, like swinging the bat, back and forth, and they were kind of like on the ground, and I was like freaking out trying to go around, knowing JJ was in the car, right? And so then he got up and he had the bat like this towards me, and I was going around the other side to try to just get out of his range where he couldn't hit me. And then I wanted the kids out of the way, whatever this fight was going to be.
Do you remember what your husband or your brother were saying or yelling during all of this?
I don't remember specifics, but they were kind of both in the heat of it. I don't think there was many words that I remember.
Somehow, though, this case got even weirder. Months later, Alex's ex-wife called the police department to deliver another huge twist that even the cops couldn't believe.
There was a lot of inappropriate sexual touching and things going on in the family, particularly between him and his sister.
What do you consider inappropriate touching?
They would moan and simulate acts, and which is not normal to me for a brother and a sister.
Despite all the evidence, Alex was released soon after the second interrogation with no charges. Unfortunately for Lori, though, there were now a lot of eyes on her family and beliefs. So a couple months later, they decided to move up to Idaho, where Chad Dable lived, letting their cultish behavior reach an all-time high. Lori became increasingly obsessed with these end times and the second coming of Christ. In Charles and Lori's divorce papers, Charles quoted that Lori believes she is a translated being who cannot taste death, sent by God to lead the 144,000, and even threatened to kill people if they got in the way of her preparations for the second coming.
I feel like that I work for the Lord. I feel like I've turned my life to Him from circumstances that have happened to me in my life, and I ask Him who He wants me to meet, who He needs me to go to, and what He wants me to do.
But most dangerously of all was her belief that anybody associated with Satan or the dark side were threats to her, threats that she had to deal with. On the 8th of September 2019, Lori, Alex, JJ, and Tylee headed to Yellowstone National Park. While this picture may have just seemed like an image of a happy family, it's actually the final photo of Tylee ever taken while she was alive. The very next day, Alex's phone shows him hanging around in Chad's yard for 2 hours before Chad texts his ex-wife Tammy to tell her that a raccoon was shot and buried on their property. Less than 2 weeks later, JJ is also seen alive for the very last time in this doorbell footage. That evening, Alex is seen carrying JJ into their house. Lori explains to friends that this is because he was being a zombie, a term they frequently use to describe people controlled by dark spirits that can only be released through death.
If they were able to get rid of all the zombies in the world, then those zombies wouldn't get into those dead bodies and come back, kind of idea. And so, let's find out how many zombies are in Arizona. Okay, there's 20,000 or whatever, 10. I don't even remember the numbers, it was so out there. And then she'd say a little prayer, whatever words she'd come up with that she thought were powerful. And then he would check, oh, somebody died. Look, you can go find out. Well, he'd say that later to David, but anyway. In my opinion, what I saw, at least, was just through a prayer that these people would pass away.
Lori and Chad believed that there were millions of zombies around the world, and the only way for the Earth to become fully pure was for them all to die. But they were extraordinarily good at keeping their beliefs secret from the cops, and in 2019, they had no reason to suspect that Chad or Lori were doing anything wrong. That was until just a month later when Chad's ex-wife of 29 years, Tammy, died suddenly in her sleep, marking the family's second death in just 3 months.
Tammy's death was odd from the beginning. Family said she died in her sleep. They didn't want an autopsy performed.
We've had 2 deaths in 3 months. Everybody's passing away. My siblings on top of this are missing. My mom was missing until they found her in Hawaii, and it was just, everything was a question mark.
Tammy's death was extremely strange. She was in perfect physical health and she had no illnesses, but Chad requested for her to be buried without an autopsy. There were still dozens of other questions that the couple had yet to answer. There was still no sign of JJ or Ty Lee, and even Charles' kids were begging for an explanation for their dad's death. But it seemed like neither Lori nor Chad felt like sticking around to answer these questions, as 2 weeks later, they completely disappeared. The pair had gone off the grid and found themselves getting married in Hawaii, unbeknownst to anyone in the family and away from the ever more watchful eyes of the cops. But little did the couple know, their time in paradise would soon come to a sudden halt. Just days after the wedding, JJ's parents contacted the police saying that they hadn't been able to contact him for months and officially reported him missing. A month later, questions were finally being raised about the exact cause of Tammy's death. Her body was exhumed for an autopsy, and what they found changed everything. Tammy's death wasn't natural or accidental. She died of suffocation caused by a second party, and the discoveries didn't stop there. Text messages were quickly recovered between Chad and Lori talking about how Tammy was trapped in limbo and possessed by a dark spirit. Chad's property was then searched, and Lori was ordered to prove to authorities that her children were alive, an order she failed to complete. Finally, on the 21st of February 2020, Lori Vallow was arrested for child abandonment. And just a couple months later, both JJ and Ty Lee's remains were found on Chad's property. JJ was wrapped in a black plastic bag buried in a shallow grave, and Ty Lee was found beneath a pet cemetery, burned and torn apart. Lori Vallow's trial began on April 3, 2023. The Doomsday Cult mom is currently facing charges on 9 counts, including first-degree murder, conspiracy to murder, and insurance fraud for continuing to receive JJ's government benefits long after his death. At best, Lori is facing life in prison, but prosecutors have stated that they have vowed to seek the death penalty for her truly devilish crimes.